So here you can see a little overview of all the materials that you're going to need when making plates, concrete plates. So of course you're going to need some concrete. Preferably you're going to use something that's already mixed in, so you don't have to add anything but water. I always use gloves when mixing concrete because you can get chemical burn when you're working with concrete for a long time. I also have some silicone spray, some tape and some Plasti-Dip. We also have some PVC piping that's going to be laid at the core of your plate. Of course you have a wooden board that your concrete is going to be cured on. Some aluminum, preferably a big sheet that can be 1 meter on 1 meter. Also some plastic that's going to be laid at the bottom of your concrete. Some fiberglass, a scale with a measuring cup, a bucket. So as you can see, there is PVC pipes that are 50 millimeters in diameter, so 5 centimeters. And I thought that this was perfect to slide over my bar because the bar is 5 centimeters in diameter. But apparently there are other pipes that are also 50 millimeter in diameter, but there is a difference between a female part and a male part. So make sure you don't buy the wrong one. You need the female part. I'm going to show you guys why. So this is the bar that I'm using right now. It's just a standard powerlifting bar, and they are 5 centimeters in diameter. But as you can see, this is the part that I was talking about before. It's also 5 centimeter, but this is the male part, this is the female part. So they're both 5, but you can see this one won't slide over because it's just as big as the bar. So what you need is the female part that will perfectly slide over the bar. Now for the measurements of the aluminum border or edge that you will be making, I'm not going to go into detail discussing all of the calculations that I made to get to a perfect 20 kg plate. All you really need to know is the circumference and the width of the aluminum border. So I based my calculations on the measurements of a standard Rogue 20 kg calibrated plate. This was done to ensure that when I would be deadlifting, it would be done from the exact same height as a 20 kg Rogue plate. So the circumference of the plate, which is going to be the length of the aluminum border, is going to be 141 centimeters or 55.66 inches. The width of the border is going to be 6.4 centimeters or 2.48 inches. So now that we know how long that the aluminum border is going to be, we just need to cut it out of the metal aluminum sheet. So this is just 1 millimeter thick aluminum sheet, and you of course measure it out, and then by going through it with a box cutter enough times, you can then go to the edge of your working table, and then you can start folding it over like this, and eventually it will break off and you will have a perfect clean cut that you can then use, of course, as a perfect circle. Once you've got this aluminum piece, you need to put some clear tape on top of it, because if you don't do this and you just use aluminum, when you pour the concrete into it, you're not gonna be able to take it out because the concrete is going to be glued to the aluminum. This is the tape I was talking about, so just some regular clear tape. Use this to cover the aluminum, and that way you will be sure that the concrete won't get stuck to it. Once the aluminum has been covered with clear tape, you can start using some hot glue gun to glue the aluminum to the base of this wood and make sure that it's a perfect circle. Now that we're done making the mold where the concrete is going to be cured in, we can start preparing all the other materials that are going to go into the making of the plate. So I started cutting up some rebar. This will be laid at the center of the concrete plate to reinforce it. To make the concrete even sturdier, I will be adding some fiberglass into the mix. Now, as I showed you before, at the core of the plate you will be putting some PVC pipe. It's 5 centimeters in diameter and it's the female part. Before you do that though, you need to put some grooves into it to ensure that it's not going to slide out of the concrete. Also in mine there were little ripples in the center of the PVC pipe, so I made sure to take them out by using my drill bit and some sanding paper. It has to be perfectly smooth, otherwise it's not going to slide over your bar. Now that you still have the PVC pipe in your hands, you can try it out and slide it over your bar, because it's way easier to do when you still have it in hand instead of in the concrete. Now you just put it at the middle of your plate. Next up you can start making the concrete. To do this, of course, you need to weigh out how much material you're going to need. I used 2 different types of concrete. One was with more stones in it, the other one was more chalky. You don't need to do this if you want to use one type of concrete, that's perfectly fine. So I weighed out 9.2 kilos of concrete for the first batch. Next up you can add the water into the mix. So to the 9.2 kilos of concrete we add 1 liter of water, which is 1 kilo, and then also the fiberglass. Once you've added all the ingredients, you can start mixing it all up. This is a great training for your forearms. I swear mine were on fire. I then switched to a more mechanical solution, because really my forearms were burning. Start adding the silicone spray on the sides of your mold. You really need to use a lot of it, otherwise you won't be able to get your concrete out of your molds and you might have to cut it open or break it and then you have to redo it all over. So use a lot of it. Now for the fun part, you get to add the concrete into your mold and also start tapping it down with your hands. Now take your time to do this to make sure that there are no air bubbles trapped inside the concrete. This is important for a later stage to make sure that you have a really sturdy plate. As we have used half of our material right now, we know that adding the rebarb into it is going to ensure that it's going to be perfectly in the center of the 2 layers of concrete. We continue by repeating the exact same process. We make another batch of 9.6 kilos of concrete and add 1 liter of water. Now that we have done this twice, we know that we are at a total of 19.2 kilos of concrete and 2 liters of water, which is 2 kilos, which then brings us to a total of 21 kilos and 200 grams. We take into account the rebarb, which is 100 grams, so in total we have 21 kilos and 300 grams of wet material. Once all the concrete is in the mold, it's really important that you try to smooth it out as much as possible, because that will give you a plate that's pleasant to the touch. And here you have it, the finished products. I mean, almost. So this was filmed 3 days after the concrete was poured into the mold. And then I used some wooden blocks to elevate the mold and put some foam pads underneath it so I could catch the plate. Now to get the plate out of the mold, I just used a hammer and slightly tapped on top of the mold, and as you can see it started to slide out. Here you can see if you used enough silicone spray. I hope you did, because otherwise you have to cut open your mold. So there's one more thing that I want to show you guys. So when you make the mold, I told you to use some clear tape and put it on the inside of the aluminum border. As you can see now, that tape is slightly damaged, so you will need to replace it if you want to make more plates, of course. If you don't and you just lose the aluminum, then the plate is going to be stuck to the aluminum, so use the tape and replace it once it's needed. Now for the moment of truth. If my calculations were right, we should now have a 20 kg and 500 gram heavy plate. And yes, it was. So this is still a little bit too heavy, it's 500 grams too much, but the concrete is fresh and will still lose some water weight. Also, when you use the plates a lot, some of the edges will chip off, so I prefer to have it a little bit heavier than it should be, so that I can use it for a longer period of time. My final thoughts on concrete plates. So, are they a good alternative to iron plates? I personally think yes, if you have the materials to do it yourself, and if you're just going to bench, deadlift and squat with them, if you're not going to do anything crazy like Olympic weightlifting and drop them, then I think concrete plates are the best alternative you can have for the expensive iron plates. For example, if you have a deadlift that's 180 kilos like I do, you need 8 plates, and one plate can cost you up to 80 euros. So that would mean I would have to spend 640 euros to plates. Personally, I'm not willing to spend that much money. I just made my own little home gym with a power rack out of wood, some concrete weights, and I bought a bar, and now I can train at home. So yes, they are a good alternative if you're just going to train with them, like bench, deadlift and squat.